My life has never been so scary. We have been together for 10 years, 7 of which we have been married. We have always had a stable family, full of small joys that become everyday comfort. On Sundays, we used to make pancakes, and in the evening we watched cartoons as a family. And I sincerely thought we were doing well. But over the past few months, something has changed. Megan has become somewhat distant. She said it was because of work, but I found it hard to believe. She was spending more time on her phone now, smiling at the messages I read. Her phone was always in her pocket or facing down on her desk. I thought maybe it was because of stress, because her job in marketing was quite exhausting. One evening, when she went outside to talk on the phone, I stayed in the house with Noah. My son and I were playing Monopoly, but I noticed that Megan didn't come back for a long time. I looked out the window and saw her silhouette in the light of the. She was saying something in a quiet voice, smiling as if in a personal conversation. The next morning I decided not to be silent. Megan, you often go out to talk on the phone. What's wrong? I tried to sound calm. She just waved it off. It's just a friend from work, discussing a project. But my instincts told me that this was not true. I started paying attention to the details. She began to spend more time on her, even on days when she stayed at home. Her laughter would come when the phone rang or she received messages. And then I decided that I had to find out the truth. It became my. When she left her phone in the kitchen one night, I tried it. To unlock it, but I didn't know the code. All this fueled my anger and suspicions. She was hiding something, and I had to find it. The next week I found out that she had new meetings in her schedule. And that's when I decided to act. I needed confidence. I needed an evidence base. Before I opened the cards. Megan did not know that I was studying her every move. But I couldn't be blind anymore, even if I wanted to be. She started coming home late, and when we ate dinner together, she would sit staring at her phone more and more often. Sometimes she didn't even hear my questions. I began to feel that the conversations between us had become formal. She talked about work, about her friends, but nothing real, nothing important. The last straw came when I asked her why she so often spends time at work instead of being at home with us. Is everything okay with you? You seem worried, she said when I asked the question again. And that's when I realized that she didn't want to answer my questions. She didn't even try to pretend to talk to me like she used to. One of those evenings, as we sat at home, I felt my mind. Megan had gone to the shower again, leaving her phone on the couch. My hand reached for it more than once, but I tried to fight the temptation. In the end, he couldn't it anymore. I grabbed the phone, trying not to give myself away. I found a message that made my heart clench. She was discussing our next weekend with someone, and it me. The content of the messages was exactly that. Just as I feared. They were warm phrases, words like, I can't wait to see you, and, you're amazing. My hands began to shake, and I put the phone back down, feeling my heart being taken away. I didn't know what to do. I wanted to explode, but I was still hoping for some kind of explanation, even though I already knew it wasn't going to be a simple explanation. I decided to proceed cautiously to get more evidence before making a move. The next day, I didn't say a word to Megan. I went back to my usual rhythm of life, but now everything was different. I started to follow her schedule, paying attention to the details. In the evening, when she came home late, I asked her cautiously. What happened at work? Did you have some important things to do again? She did not answer immediately. Her gaze was absent, and her eyes were slightly blurred. Only after a pause did she speak briefly. Everything is as usual. Why are you so nervous? Is something bothering you? I smiled, even though I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. She was trying to convince me that everything was fine, but I already knew I couldn't stop any longer. My suspicion had become my reality. I began to notice new details that had seemed insignificant before, but now took on significance. The way she handled the phone, the way she put it in her pocket, and even the way she left it on the table with her work papers when she went to the kitchen. I became more and more convinced that something was wrong. Although I tried not to look suspicious, a storm was raging in my head. It was like a chain that was closing, giving me neither peace nor a way out. Megan became extremely protective of her phone. Whereas we used to just leave it on the table or keep it on the bedside table, she now carried it even to the bathroom. It was clear that with every step she took, I felt more and more like a stranger in your own home. One evening, after she went to the shower, I decided to act. My heart was beating faster and faster, but I felt it was now or never. I picked up the phone, examined every inch of its screen, looking for clues. And then I found the same name again. Declan. This man became a real threat in my mind. He was the one she kept in the shadows, the one who waited for her messages at night. I didn't know what to do. Finding another piece of evidence only confirmed my suspicions, but I couldn't tell her right now. I didn't want to put her on the spot so early. I wanted her to reveal herself. I wanted to see her start making excuses. But I couldn't hold in any longer. My anger was growing, and I felt that if I didn't find a way to deal with it, I would become a fire that would just destroy everything around me. I had a plan. I would not let her just run away from me like that. I have done with other men. I will be ready for anything. The very next day, I began to study her every move. If she left the house, I noticed how much time she spent on the phone with someone. She started going to the office on weekends, even though she always said she only worked there on weekdays. And I realized that something was. She was trying to disappear from me. Preparations for the next step were ongoing. I decided that I needed to make the first move. And to do that, I had to go further. I needed more evidence. My obsession with the evidence was getting deeper. Every day I could feel my understanding of what was happening starting to destroy me from the inside. I could no longer just sit there and watch her cover up, not understanding why. Why did she choose him over me? What did he have that I didn't? These questions were running through my head every second, and even when I tried to distract myself with work or my son, they wouldn't leave me. But I was smart. I began to monitor her habits with double the attention. Megan changed her schedule. She started going to the gym in the evenings. She used to always work out in the morning before Noah and I sat down to breakfast. Now, she would go to the working out after work. I started to notice that her phone, which used to stay in her purse or on her desk, was now often by the door, always on the desk, within reach when she was getting ready. And then one day, when I forgot my t-shirt in the car, I happened to see her replying to a message from Declan. It was the same style I'd seen in the evening hours, gentle words that clearly didn't match the tone of our conversations at home. I quickly returned the house to avoid her sight, but those messages left a bitter mark on my soul. That evening I sat in the kitchen again, trying to sort out my feelings. I couldn't be stuck in a dead end any longer. I needed to understand everything, even if it meant that I would destroy my reality. But I wasn't ready for what would happen. The next day, I decided to go one step further and install a tracking app on her phone. I was ready to gather all the facts so that when the moment came, I could expose her. I chose an app that was discreet, allowing me to. I could track her messages, calls, even her whereabouts when she was away from home. A few days later, I saw her usual route on her phone. She was heading to the office again after work. But this time I didn't stay home, I followed her. My heart was beating wildly as I sat the wheel and followed her car. I had confirmation of everything that was happening, but I still couldn't bring myself to act like a normal person. I decided to wait a little longer, to observe without revealing her secret without final proof. The time I spent monitoring was not a vacation, it became my worst nightmare. Eventually, she stopped at a cafe on the outskirts of the city. And I realized that it was no longer a coincidence. I was sitting in my car, watching through the windshield as Megan got out of the car and walked to the cafe. Take my eyes off her as she walked up to the entrance and smiled. She looked like I hadn't seen her in a long time, happy, free, carefree. It was the same smile I had seen before everything changed. The smile that only I used to get. My hand reached for my phone again, and I started tracking her steps through the app. The signal showed that she had entered the cafe. I felt the pressure in my chest increase. I knew it was now or never. I would have to see him. Declan. What I could only imagine in my mind was about to become a reality. I sat in the car, her enter, and my thoughts flitted between anger and pain. I imagined them sitting together, laughing, sharing their little. With jokes. You don't know how I feel about this, Megan, I thought. And when you find out who's really cheating here, it will be your worst nightmare. I watched them sit down in the cafe. At first I didn't notice him, but then I did. He was tall, with dark hair, wearing a black coat, and a facial expression that seemed familiar. I didn't know who he was, but the way he looked at her left no doubt that they knew each other as much more than just colleagues. Megan smiled at him the way you smile at someone who has become more than just a friend. I could hear them talking to each other, their voices quiet but very intimate, as if they were in a separate world, without me, without my son, without everything we had built together. I have run out and caused a scandal. It could have been like in the movies, throwing all the evidence in her face, yelling at her, and both of them making her feel the way I was feeling right now. But that would have been too easy. I wasn't going to let her do that. To get rid of it quickly. She had to feel I feel. I stayed there for a few more minutes, watching them. They sat across from each other, as if forgetting everything around them. Her were touching his, and she was laughing again. That laugh, it was not for me. And at that moment I felt that I was losing her for good. And then she went back to the car. I started to start the engine, but suddenly I felt every muscle in my body tense, like my nerves were on edge. Megan got into the car, and I watched her drive home as if nothing had happened. I stayed put, then went home, even though I was broken inside. I knew I could no longer turn a blind eye to what had happened. I had to act. I was ready to do something that I would never have done if not for that moment. That night I couldn't sleep. She was already sleeping next to me, her steady breathing was so close, and all I could hear was the echo of my thoughts that kept me awake. I remembered all the moments when I tried to keep everything together, when I felt defenseless and abandoned, when her detachment became more and more noticeable. And I started thinking about how to destroy what she had built. I wasn't someone who acted rashly, but every minute I stopped only made my internal struggle worse. I had a plan. And it began to take shape in my head. It was not simple revenge. I didn't want to just insult her or show her how much she had me. I wanted her to feel every moment of my pain, every drop of the betrayal I experienced in the shadow of her lies. But before acting, I had to take a step back and observe. I had to be calm, in control of the situation, and irreversible when the moment came. The very next day, after Megan stayed home, I decided to take the next step. She left for another work meeting, but I knew where she was going. Through my observations and the monitoring program, I found that she often goes to the same cafe. It was not just a coincidence. I realized that her new secret romance was more important to her than what we had built together. I decided to start playing her at her own game. I needed to make her jealous of what I was doing. I started spending more time with my friends, more dinners at the bar, more socializing with other women who hated Megan. I wasn't doing it out of jealousy, I was doing it to see her reaction, to cause that anxiety in her eyes. I met Kelly in a bar. She worked as a bartender and was much younger than Megan. We spent several evenings just talking about life. Kelly was not only beautiful, but also smart. She talked about her ambitions, her plans, and more she became not just entertainment for me, but also a way to break up with Megan. Kelly even started sending me texts, asking me to meet her. I needed only one thing, for Megan to notice. I wanted her to feel every movement of this irreversible process, every step I took toward her, away from her. She had to know that I was no longer her property, that she had lost me not only emotionally but also physically. A few days later, Megan came home late, just like always. I got ready, put on the best suit I had, and went to the same cafe where she met him all the time. I sat at a table, watching Megan enter the room with Declan. Her gaze quickly searched my eyes among the people, but I didn't turn my head, didn't even nod. She had to notice it herself. It was my revenge. I didn't run after her, I didn't make a scandal. I was just there, and I had the right to be there. And so did she. From the night I went to the cafe without saying a word to Megan, I felt the wheel turning. She didn't immediately realize what had happened, but every look she gave me, every movement she made around me, all of it reinforced my feelings. She began to take more interest in my life. Every day she became more suspicious, more intrusive in her questions. I didn't give her answers not because I was silent, but because I wanted her to feel like she was losing control. Megan didn't realize what I had done right away, but with each question she asked, I pulled away more and more. It was small steps, but they worked. She started asking questions about my evenings, why I sometimes came in late, why I didn't answer messages right away. Every time I refused to answer her questions or didn't answer them completely, her wariness became more apparent. And I liked that. One evening, when I came home late and went into the bathroom, I saw her talking quietly on the phone. Her voice was soft, but somehow strained. I went to the door to hear more, but then stopped. I knew this was the moment. Megan wasn't being honest and I couldn't take it anymore. If she wanted to continue playing this game, I am ready to participate in it fully. I decided to change the course of events. I started going with other women. At first it was small meetings, coffees, simple walks. But then I met Jessica. She was younger, with an open, direct look. I knew I wasn't going to get serious with her, but every time I spent time with her, I felt. Megan was getting nervous. Each new meeting was a small signal to her. Megan began to notice changes in my habits. I just waited. I waited for her to say something, for me to express my feelings. She did. She continued to be silent, but every time she looked at me, it became more and more difficult. I was at the center of this game, and although the pain of her betrayal was indescribable, I was preparing for the end. And then, one day, when I came home early, I saw her in the hallway, standing in front of the mirror, again with the phone in her hand. She quickly put it away when she noticed me, but I already knew. Her gaze was so alienated that I could no longer hide the anger and pain that had built up inside me. I decided to talk to her. Do you want to know why I changed? I approached her, and horror flashed in her eyes. She started to back away, but I was determined. You already know why, Megan. Did you think I wouldn't notice? I spoke openly for the first time. She didn't say anything, just giggled nervously, and her eyes turned away from mine. It was the last thing I could stand. It wasn't just a betrayal. It was a deliberately constructed lie, and I was no longer ready to be a part of her games. My patience was over. That night, after I approached her and spoke to her, everything changed. Megan stood in front of me, her eyes full of fear and uncertainty. I could see her trying to build some kind of defense, but I was no longer ready to listen to her excuses. I could feel my nerves burning, and I could no longer remain silent. I could no longer be the patient man who deceived himself by trying to To restore what could not be restored. Megan, I paused to let her realize that this wasn't just a conversation, it had become something more. I know about you and Declan. Her face changed. She froze instantly. Her lips closed and her gaze became frank, as if she had just been caught red-handed stealing. How did you know? Her voice was trembling, and she began to nervously wave her hair as if it would help her relax. But I saw only one thing in her eyes. She was ready for it, she knew this moment would come, but she still couldn't be ready. How did I know? I repeated her words, and a bitter laugh escaped my lips. Have you forgotten who your husband is, Megan? I'm not blind. And I'm not stupid. All this time I've been putting up with your lies, your constant work meetings, your late nights at work. I started to follow you. And I found your messages. She took a step back, and I saw her lips pressed together and her eyes crying. I remembered the first tears I saw when we met, when she told me how much she loved me. But these tears were different. They were tears of fear. Fear that I was no longer the one who waited for her to come home from work, who would forgive her for everything. Fear that she had lost control. Jake, I don't know what to say. It happened a long time ago, and I don't want it to happen again. I can't live like this anymore, she hesitated, trying to find the words. But I didn't want to listen anymore. You don't know what to say. You made it all up, you've been living a lie, Megan. I was on the verge of tears, but this time I didn't want to apologize for my emotions. Did you love me before he came along? Or did you have someone else from the very beginning of our family? Another in your heart? Now you want an apology? Now you want to talk about how I can understand your problems? Megan started to cry, and I felt my heart clench. But this was no longer the woman I loved. She was a who was trying to forgive her betrayal and take back what she had done. I don't know what to do. I still love you, but I don't know how to change it. Her voice was filled with remorse, but it was not enough. I couldn't forget what she had done. I couldn't just forgive her like in old romantic movies. I took a step back and decided that this time I would not give her a chance. I was no longer the man who simply forgave, who endured pain. My revenge was not in words, but in actions. And I intended to see it through. I knew was no next step. Now I will play by my own rules. Megan sat in silence, crying. I stood in front of her, and every step she took backward only confirmed that we were no longer on the same ground. She could not turn back the clock, and I was no longer ready to forgive her. I was not looking for understanding, I was looking for justice. And although I felt pain, this pain gave me strength that I had long since lost. You ruined everything, I said, my voice calm, even cold. Did you think you could get away with it? Tell me you love me and still lead a life like this? She could not answer. There was only darkness in her eyes, which I now felt her to be. She was confused, trying to find the words that could change everything, but everything had already been decided. We would never go back to the way things. I was no longer the one who adored her. I had become someone else. After that night, when we finally talked everything through, I decided to move on. I didn't want to just leave her, I didn't want to just leave our relationship without retribution. I started to build a plan that would eventually drive her to the edge. But it wasn't just revenge. I didn't want to destroy her emotionally or physically. I wanted her to realize that her betrayal was deeper than she could have ever imagined. Step 1, I started dating other women. I was calm and cautious, but at the same time always left Megan feeling like she had been replaced. She started to notice my evenings out, my trips with others, but that was just the beginning. My goal was simple, to make her feel what I felt: doubt, fear, hopelessness. But the worst came when I decided it was time to show her the true face of my revenge. The day I came home, I saw her sitting in our living room. There was something new in her eyes, a mixture of desperation and willingness to fight. "I want to talk," she said. "I'm ready to do everything to make us what we were again. Even if it means I have to apologize to you and to myself." I knew her words were not sincere. She was still trying to find a way out, but I already knew that this was not the time for forgiveness. Forgiveness? I smiled, but it wasn't the smile I would have shown in the old days. "You want forgiveness after everything you've done? It doesn't work anymore, Megan. You've chosen this path, and I'm going to stay one step ahead of you." Megan tried to defend herself, but her words drowned in I was really starting to feel. She realized that her time was up. She realized that she was now facing a man who would not allow himself to be fooled anymore. It was not just revenge. It was a game that I didn't understand at first, but now I understood its rules. And in this game, I was the one in charge. A few days passed after that evening, and things didn't seem to go as I had planned. I watched Megan try to make amends, but every move she made seemed like an attempt to escape the reality I had shown her. I saw her trying to be attentive, asking about my day, making dinner, even trying to organize a family party for Noah. None of it was sincere, it was all just a reflection of her fear, her desire to regain control of the situation. But I was in full control. I was in no hurry. I had an idea, and I followed it step by step. I didn't intend to do it abruptly. I wanted her to experience everything that I was worried. I wanted her to understand why it became so difficult for me to believe in us again. And when she began to notice that I was spending more and more time with others, that I was staying at home less and less, her nerves began to gradually give out. One evening when I came home late, I noticed that she was sitting in the kitchen with the phone in her hands. I could hear her talking to someone on the other end of the line, her voice was tense and excited. She did not notice that I had come in. I started eavesdropping, standing in the dark. "Yes, I know that everything will be fine. I have already freed myself from what happened. I'll do everything to get him back," she said, her words making my skin crawl. I stood there and listened to her. It was not just a conversation, it was an attempt to restore what had already been lost. But she didn't understand, nothing could brought back. I couldn't just forgive her, and even if I wanted to, it was too late now. When she finally put the phone down, I went over and said, "Did you think I didn't know anything? Did you think you could hide all this from me? Did you think I would sit here and wait for your excuses?" Megan turned and looked at me. Her eyes were full of regret, but it didn't matter. She realized that none of this was working. It was the moment when I felt that her betrayal could no longer be covered with words of love or apology. I realized that I washed my hands. She said, her voice trembling, but I wasn't listening anymore. "No, you don't understand. We can go back way things were. But that's not possible anymore, Megan. You chose your path, and I chose mine. And now I'm going to move forward." She looked at me silently, as if trying to find some hope of returning, but I gave her no chance. I was no longer someone she could fool. Megan tried to get closer, to grab my arm, but I pulled away. "I can't forgive you," I said. "You lost me." My revenge was not to destroy her life. It was not the kind of revenge where you destroy physically or emotionally. My revenge was to preserve myself and move forward. I will not let her take away what I lost long ago, my dignity, my trust, my faith in us. Megan stood in front of me, her face disfigured, but this time I had no compassion. That moment was my final step toward freedom. From the night I turned my back on Megan, my life became completely different. It wasn't just a breakup. It was more than just a goodbye. It was the moment when I stopped being a man waiting for excuses and apologies. I became a man who finally realized my strength to get out of the game where I was being used, the strength not to sacrifice myself for the sake of another. Megan was silent, not knowing what to do next. Her gaze was empty, as if she was trying to find words, but I was no longer the man she could make believe in promises again. I was no longer the man she could turn away from the truth with smiles and promises. We were no longer a team. Everything that once bound us was gone. I stopped being afraid of leaving her. I stopped being afraid of losing her. Because in reality, I had lost her a long time ago. And no matter how hard she tried to get me back, I was ready to move on. You can't just forget everything, Jake. It's not that easy, she said quietly, trying to find the right words, but I knew it didn't matter anymore. I don't want you to ask me, Megan. You've lost everything you could have. And I'm not going to let myself be a part of your lies again. I stood before her, feeling waves of anger, frustration, and even pain. I was no longer the man who was ready to forgive, who was ready for something more than just fighting for myself. I wasn't waiting anymore. And this was something I should have realized a long time ago. I did not return home that night. I left everything, the apartment, family memories, all their gossip and illusions. I left for a few days just to be alone. Megan tried to call and write, but I ignored her. I realized that I could no longer be the one who wanted to bring back something that no longer existed. While I was trying to regain my strength, I came to the conclusion that sometimes the best way to avenge a betrayal is not to fight and destroy. The greatest revenge is to start a new life. And I was ready to start it. I was no longer looking for someone to blame, I just wanted to be me. Those few days I spent alone became a moment of recovery for me. I could no longer carry the heavy load I was carrying. I could feel my heart, which had been torn to pieces, starting to beat again, but without any illusions. I found a place for myself, a small apartment on the outskirts of the city, where everything looked different. There were no memories of my old life, just a clean start that I had long needed. Megan kept calling, but I knew I had no desire to hear her voice anymore. I wasn't ready to listen to her apologies, because they didn't make sense anymore. I decided that I would rebuild myself. I started playing sports, walking around the city, finding time for new people, new opportunities. I realized that there are many ways to build your life after you have experienced betrayal. You don't have to be a victim of circumstances. You don't have to look for someone to blame for what happened. You have the right to a new beginning, and I found it. A few weeks later, I met Lucy. She was completely different from Megan. No shadows from the past. Calm, intelligent, open-minded. We had incredible chemistry. And although I didn't try to compare her to Megan, I felt that this was a new path. I began to realize that betrayal can be survived if you let go in time and open up new opportunities for yourself. Megan still called, she came to my new apartment, trying to talk, but I was ready for another life. To be happy. The night she came for the second time, I told her, Megan, I don't want to be a part of your excuses anymore. I'm letting you go, and you need to accept that. You and I are history. Tears appeared in her eyes again, but I did not allow myself to sympathize. I was not a man who would complain about his fate. I kept walking. Are you letting me go? Her voice was trembling, but I couldn't say anything but, yes, I am letting go. And that's the only thing I can do. That was my final farewell. I didn't need any apologies or forgiveness. I became someone who had found himself again. This was my path, my new beginning. Megan didn't call or visit anymore. And although sometimes I still felt pain, it was no longer the pain of betrayal. It was the pain of losing myself in someone else's promises and hopes. But now, I am finally free. Free from all the deceptions, free from constantly looking for answers where there were none. I was used to a new life. A life where every day brought new opportunities, new chances to become better. I started new hobbies, traveled alone, found new friends. Lucy, of course, was part of this new path, but I was in no hurry. I didn't want to fall into the trap again. I didn't want to feel like I was putting all my hopes in one person again. I was whole now, and no one could take that feeling away from me. A few months later, I returned to the place where Megan and I spent our first dates, a small park on the outskirts of the city. I had always remembered it fondly. But now I didn't feel sad or hurt. I just sat there, watching by the people around me, and I suddenly realized that I was no longer looking for her images in every step. I no longer wait for someone to change my life. I changed myself. And I did it on my own path. The laughter of children, the smell of flowers in the park, all of this now part of my new world. I left behind everything that was in the past and let go. I let go of her. I let go of myself. And it was the most powerful revenge. Since then, I've never looked back. Megan, Declan, even what had happened between us, it was all behind me. I was no longer the man who fought to hold on to something that doesn't want to stay. I was a man who accepted my fate and realized that the best revenge was to start a new life without dragging the shadow of the past with me. And I realized one thing: letting go is not a weakness. It is a strength. The power that freedom gives. And now, finally, I was free.